Hey guys, in this video we're going to be taking a closer look at Panasonic LUMIX's latest camera, the S5. Now straight off the bat, for me this camera takes a lot of the qualities that I really liked about the GH5 camera, with it being so lightweight and compact and a really competitive price point, and merges that with a full frame sensor and a lot of the newer tech that's found in the S lineup of cameras. Now in this video I'm going to talk you through the key features, show you lots of test footage, and of course give you my opinion on how I found using the camera. But of course I do have my hands on one, so please, if you do have any questions about the S5, do just put them in the comments below and I'll do my best to get back to you. And if I don't know the answer, then I'll just test and find out for you. So let's first take a look at the body. The first thing you'll notice is just how small this camera is. It's actually smaller and weighs less than the GH5, which is already incredibly compact. And then of course compared to the S1H, well, there's a huge difference. If you've used the S1 cameras before, then the body is going to feel fairly similar, it's just smaller. It uses the same L mount that the S1 cameras use too, which is very easy to adapt to systems that have a larger flange distance, such as EF mount. There are dual SD card slots, a mic and headphone socket, and a USB-C port for both data transfer and for charging. You can power the camera continuously from that USB-C port, which is what I did with my Powerbase Edge whilst filming some interviews. There's a fully articulating 3-inch LCD touchscreen, along with of course an OLED viewfinder. Now both of these are at a lower resolution than what you'd find in the S1 lineup, but that is reflected in the price I suppose. The only real compromise it seems Panasonic have had to make with getting that full frame sensor in this small body is the HDMI port. It's a micro type connector and not full size. In terms of power, there's a new 2200 mAh battery. This battery can be used in the GH lineup of cameras, but the older GH batteries can't be used in the S5 as the contacts are in a different position. The S5 has a 24.2 megapixel full frame CMOS sensor that is claimed to be able to resolve up to 14 plus stops of dynamic range. It's actually the same sensor that's found in the more expensive S1H. Couple that very impressive dynamic range with Panasonic's colour science, and it does make for a very pleasing look straight from camera. Pretty much everything I've shot has been in Vlog, and all I've done is add a Panasonic Rec 709 LUT. The camera has a dual native ISO, and when shooting in Vlog, those are 640 and 4000, and these values do change depending on which profile you're shooting with. Ultimately, this is really going to make capturing cleaner shots in lower lit scenarios much easier. I found this camera very easy to get smooth looking shots while shooting handheld. The sensor is stabilised, and body only that's 5 stops, or when coupled with an IS lens is up to 6.5 stops. When the camera is this lightweight, having that 5-axis stabilisation is crucial for handheld work, because the camera is just too light to create any inertia to counter that unwanted movement. And in this shot you can see I'm just walking holding the camera. Of course there is a little bit of shake there, because it isn't a gimbal at the end of the day, but you can see how smooth it is. But when I add a little bit of stabilisation in post, just in Premiere, you can see just how smooth we can get these shots to look. It almost looks gimbal-like. So what do we have in our filmmaking arsenal when it comes to on-board recording modes? Its headline feature is that it can record in 4K at up to 30 frames a second in 10-bit 422. It can go up to 60 frames a second, but that's in 10-bit 420, and it is with an APS-C crop. Now both of these recording modes are of course done internally to the SD cards in either HEVC or MP4. And if you want to output 10-bit 422, you can do via that HDMI port in either of those formats. Of course, on board too, there are plenty of HD options as well, and I can confirm you can record in 24p also. Now, in a very short time using the S5, I used it to shoot a case study, and I'm pretty happy with how the internal recorded footage came out. Like I say, the look is very pleasing straight out of the can. Now, you do get Vlog as standard, and in terms of other picture profiles, you do have Hybrid Log Gamma, Cine D and Cine V, along with the other standard picture profiles too. I would like to see Lumix bring along some higher bitrate recording formats in future in a firmware update, maybe even some all intra options too, but for the time being I'm pretty happy with how the footage looks with these current codecs. One thing to note, which is a really big selling point with this camera, is that the DMW XLR1 audio adapter works seamlessly with it, which I think is crucial if you're looking to use this camera as a sole A camera on shoots, especially if working alone. There are some camera manufacturers who still haven't made a proprietary XLR adapter for their mirrorless cameras, so if you want to use professional microphones, you do need to use an additional preamp or external recorder, and when shooting alone, this can make for a rather clunky setup. And the DMW XLR1 gets around that because it communicates and is powered directly through the hot shoe contacts. And of course, there's no need to resync anything in post. Now, when flicking through the menu, I did notice that there was no DCI 4K recording modes available. I did ask Panasonic this, and they have confirmed that this will be coming in a future firmware update. But not just that, also the ability of recording in ProRes RAW when using an Atomos recorder is coming, and rather surprisingly, that will support up to 5.9K at up to 30 frames a second, which is pretty incredible for the price tag of this camera. For slow motion shots, the S&Q mode supports Full HD at up to 180 frames per second, and 4K at up to 60 frames a second. If you shoot in this mode, then of course your camera will play it back at normal speed, so you don't need to do this in post. You can shoot with the full sensor up to 120 frames per second in HD with autofocus, 150 frames per second, again full sensor but with manual focus only, and 180 frames per second with an APS-C crop, and again manual focus only. And do know it's not currently possible to record audio in any of the S&Q modes. Unlike when the S1 was first released, you do have full exposure control in all of the slow motion modes. There's also a dedicated S&Q button on the top dial, which makes it really easy to quickly just swap over into high-speed shooting. The S5 simply stores the setting you use last in that S&Q mode. I think that HD slow motion footage looks pretty nice. There's quite a lot of detail in there, and it doesn't look like it's falling apart, even when it's upscaled to 4K. You can shoot with anamorphic glass on the S5. Now, most of the glass you're realistically going to pair with this camera is going to cover that super 35mm crop on that full frame sensor without vignetting. There is also a specific stabilizer mode for when shooting with anamorphic glass, which I think works pretty well, and it allows you to work handheld with this sort of glass. And of course, rather crucially, you can de-squeeze in camera, so you can monitor properly. Much like the other Lumix cameras, there is support for using LUTs, and you do have a lot of video-centric monitoring tools such as waveform, histogram, peaking, zebras, and I believe a vector scope will be coming in a future firmware update. Now, the autofocus system in the S5 is, of course, much like the rest of Panasonic Lumix's cameras, contrast-based, using depth from defocus. Now, I know for some of you guys out there that might be a slight turn-off in comparison to the phaser tech systems that we have, which obviously work very, very well. Now, when Panasonic gave me the camera, they did want to stress that the algorithm for the AF in the S5 has been completely rewritten, and this algorithm is also going to be extended to the rest of the S lineup of cameras. So what they were saying was essentially is that this camera has the best AF performance out of all of the Lumix cameras to date, which is a pretty bold statement. Now, of course, when a brand or a manufacturer shouts about their own product being amazing at this, amazing at that, you do have to take it with a little bit of a pinch of salt, because of course they're going to say that. But I have to say, in my time using the camera, I think the AF performed really well, and it's nice to see that Panasonic are really squeezing every last bit of performance that they can do out of this contrast-based system. The S5 has face, eye, head, body and animal recognition, so whether you're filming a tracking piece to camera or shooting some wildlife, you do have options to help you nail that focus. Clearly, there's going to be quite a lot of people looking at this camera for use when vlogging, and I think the S5 is really going to suit that type of content creator rather well. Now of course I have a few cameras that are more suited to filmmaking than the S5. Now I say that because they are more traditional cine style cameras. They're either bigger or they're more expensive, or both. And the reality is I don't actually take these cameras out every day. I only really take them out when I have a planned shoot. And I think with the S5, the reason why I really like this camera is because of its size and weight and price. This is a camera I can see myself just slotting into my satchel or my day backpack and just carrying it around all the time with me. And then if something unfolds and I want to document it, I've got a really capable package that will allow me to do that. There's a couple of new features that I think lend themselves to vlogging. One of them is that you can now set a red marker all around the frame for when you're recording. You can also set frame markers, and of course you've got your cine style markers in there that we're used to, but also you've got some other aspect ratios in there that may be more suitable for creating content for social media platforms. And finally, if you shoot with the camera when it's vertical, it will automatically detect that and it will conform your video to portrait mode. So what you could then do is transfer that video file to your phone over Wi-Fi and then instantly share it in the likes of Instagram or Facebook in portrait mode without having to edit it. Of course, this camera is marketed towards photographers just as much as it is to filmmakers. It is a hybrid after all. I'm of course more the latter, so I'm not going to try and pretend that I can hold my own as an experienced photographer. But for the few shots that I did take, I was generally happy with it. It has a few neat tricks up its sleeve, like high resolution mode where the sensor shifts so that you can take a 96 megapixel image. It has 4K and 6K photo mode for burst shooting, and the ability to shoot and create time lapses in camera. And the video file it creates from those time lapses can be 10-bit. So the S5 is kind of like a more wallet-friendly, updated version of the S1 camera that takes on a more compact form factor. And I think the form factor is something that really appeals to me. Of course, you need to have all of that tech crammed into it, very capable video recording modes and good stills performance. But when you couple that with a form factor such as what the S5 has, it then becomes a camera that I can see myself using as an everyday camera. Now I used to use the GH5 camera in that sense, I'd carry it all the time every day and I could document things as and when it happens, unplanned. But when it came to low light scenarios, with that camera having a micro four thirds sensor and a high megapixel count, it did kind of struggle. So then the GH5S came along, I bought that camera, and great, it had dual native ISO, lower megapixel count, so it meant, when I'm doing video, I could create very clean shots in low light scenarios, no problem. But it didn't have IBIS. And then the S5 has now come along, it's got a full frame sensor, it's got a dual native ISO, and it has great IBIS, along with, of course, very capable video recording modes and stills performance. So, it's kind of hard to see what's next in line in the GH series when I've got the S5 available right now. And the big selling point with this camera is not just obviously the form factor and the tech that's built into it, but it's its price point. It's at a price point where, it's comparable to what the GH5 was when it was launched. It's very competitive. There's no point in comparing this camera to the likes of the Sony a7S Mark III, which looks like a fantastic camera, don't get me wrong, but it's a lot more expensive than this camera, so there's always going to be trade-offs, and I think those trade-offs with the S5, they're at the sweet spot for me personally. So anyway, I hope you found this video useful, guys. If you have, then hit that like button, maybe subscribe, that would make my day. And if you've got any questions, like I say, do just put them in the comments below and I'll do my best to get back to you. And if you want to find out some more information on this camera, then just head over to the Holden website. Thank you very much for watching.